My father-in-law, Arthur Langford, CEO of Langford Dynamics, leaned back in his leather chair, the kind found only in rooms designed to intimidate. The sunlight from the 47th floor hit the glass table between us, scattering reflections across the faces of 12 silent executives. "And then," he said, without looking at me, 5 minutes. "It's time for you to clean the table." That's the way he had just fired me in front of everyone. Not an employee, not a manager, his son's wife. I kept standing. The words hadn't fully registered yet. Fired for reasons still undefined. My laptop screen behind me still displayed the quarterly report I'd prepared, charts glowing in perfect order. Proof of 6 years of work. Arthur didn't care. He just raised his wrist, Rolex catching the light. 4 minutes, he said, almost bored. My badge still hung around my neck when security entered 2 men in navy suits who used to greet me every morning. One of them avoided my eyes. The other whispered, "I'm sorry, Ms. James." Someone coughed. Someone else shifted a stack of papers. I could feel the weight of power tilting in the room away from me, toward the man who enjoyed control like fine wine. I didn't speak. Silence. I'd learned. Unsettled men like him more than protest. When I finally moved, it was deliberate. I unplugged my laptop, closed the folder, and placed my company badge on the table. The sound it made felt louder than his countdown. Behind the glass wall, I saw movement. My team. The faces that had worked with me for many years stood up one by one. "Thanks for sticking with me. Let me know where you're hearing this story from. If stories of justice, courage, and quiet revenge speak to you, tap that like button and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Trust me, the next part will make your heart race." Before Arthur Langford fired me, the cracks had already begun forming 3 weeks earlier at the dinner table that had always felt more like a stage. The Langford estate sat on the outskirts of Seattle, perched on a hill that overlooked the Sound. It was the kind of place where silence echoed and money had its own gravity. Every Sunday at 7 o'clock sharp, the family gathered in the chandelier-lit dining room, pretending affection could be served alongside imported wine. That night, I arrived with my husband, Ethan, carrying the dessert I'd made a lemon tart. Arthur's wife, Vivian, always requested but never acknowledged. The staff opened the double doors for us, and the smell of roasted duck and truffle oil lingered heavy in the air. Arthur was already seated at the head of the table, phone in hand, reading market updates as if human company were a necessary inconvenience. "Skylar," he said, without looking up, "I read your quarterly summary. Solid work. Though I imagine you'll want to be careful about overextending your team next quarter." The compliment was a blade wrapped in velvet. I smiled politely and took my seat beside Ethan, who was too busy swirling his wine to notice the tension in his father's voice. Vivian poured herself another glass of Chardonnay. "Arthur's been so impressed with Avery lately," she said. "You remember her. Dear, the new executive assistant in your department, Avery Cole. 26, sharp suits, sharper ambition. I had been mentoring her for 3 months at Arthur's request. She just needs guidance," he'd said. I'd taught her everything from crisis management to system access protocols. But lately, she'd begun asking questions that didn't feel like curiosity, more like reconnaissance. Arthur set his phone down, eyes flicking toward Ethan. "You know, your wife's been working hard, maybe too hard. Avery's been stepping up. Reminds me of myself at her age, hungry, unafraid of long nights." Ethan laughed lightly, missing the insult completely. "That's a good thing, right?" Arthur didn't answer. The silence that followed was deliberate, heavy. I felt it settle like dust. My hands stayed perfectly still on the tablecloth, though my pulse betrayed me. Dinner continued. Polite conversation, strategic small talk, but beneath the clinking of silverware, something had shifted. It wasn't just family dynamics anymore. It was positioning. Arthur was grooming a replacement, and I was too professional to call it what it was: betrayal rehearsed over fine china. When dessert was served, Vivian smiled without warmth. "The tart looks lovely. Skylar, who made it for you this time?" That was the Langford way, subtle humiliation disguised as civility. I smiled back. Steady. I did, I said. As always. They laughed lightly, thinking I wouldn't notice the exchange of glances between Arthur and Avery across the table. But I did. And that was the moment I understood the decision to remove me had already been made. The only question left was when they would strike. The morning after that dinner. Langford Dynamics didn't feel like the same company. The air itself seemed electrified thin, whispering, aware. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand. The same routine I'd kept for 6 years. Yet every step felt foreign. My corner office overlooking Elliott Bay once symbolized success. Now it felt like a lookout post for betrayal. Faces passed my glass door with polite smiles that avoided eye contact. Everyone already knew something I didn't. Avery walked in late. As usual, balancing a designer latte and that practiced half smile. Morning. Skylar, she said, tossing her tote beside the desk. Her blazer matched one of mine. Not similar, identical. Arthur asked me to sit in on your compliance call today. He said it's a good opportunity to observe strategic transitions. Transitions. The word hit harder than it should have. I turned from my monitor. Did he? She nodded, pretending to check her phone. I didn't need to see the message to know what it said. The trap was already set. That week, small details began to shift. Avery started CCing Arthur on my departmental reports for transparency. Calendar invites disappeared. Resent minutes after meetings began. Ensuring I walked in late to sessions I'd organized. During a performance review call, she accidentally muted my mic while Arthur evaluated network efficiency long enough for her to present my data as her own. At first, I told myself she was simply eager, but eagerness doesn't reroute access credentials or edit timestamps. Every mistake favored her. Every correction discredited me. By Friday, sabotage had become an art form. A server backup failed overnight, and Avery quietly suggested to IT that I'd skipped a verification step. I didn't confront her. Emotion is ammunition, instead. I started documenting everything timestamps, Slack logs, trace IDs. I'd learned long ago outrage means nothing without evidence. That evening, after most of the floor cleared out, I called Liam Hayes, head of network security, and one of the few people I trusted. 2 years ago, I'd covered a breach that would have cost him his job. She's accessing files above her clearance. I told him, "How sure are you? Sure enough to stop sleeping. I'll check the logs." He said, "If she's using executive override, it'll leave a signature. Even Arthur can't erase that." When I finally left, Seattle's drizzle blurred the skyline into streaks of silver. I walked slowly toward the garage. Every conversation with Arthur replaying in fragments the compliments, the sudden oversight, the dinner. None of it had been mentorship. It was rehearsal for replacement. Monday proved it. Arthur scheduled an impromptu strategy alignment meeting. Every department head received an invite except me. I learned through Liam's text from inside the boardroom, "Avery's presenting your restructure plan." Header says her name. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. Then I finished my pending tasks, attended what meetings remained, and left at 6:00 p.m. sharp. No outburst, no visible fracture. Calmness unsettles predators more than rage. That night, I opened my private drive and created an encrypted folder named Archive. Inside, I stored 6 years of designs, patents, and architecture blueprints, each legally attributed to me under Langford's registry. On top, I wrote one line, "If they ever make you the villain, end the story with evidence by Wednesday." Liam confirmed what I already knew. Avery had been granted temporary administrative clearance signed personally by Arthur. The timestamp traced back to Sunday evening, hours before that family dinner when he'd told me to relax and enjoy the night. It wasn't paranoia. It was premeditation. I printed the authorization email and locked it in my desk drawer. Then I sat back and watched the city lights ripple across the window. I had built Langford Dynamics infrastructure redundant firewalls, mirrored nodes, protocols strong enough to withstand global cyber attacks. but none of it could protect me from what came next. By Friday, Langford Dynamics pulsed with quiet tension. The glass and steel exterior looked unchanged, but inside, the air felt brittle, like one wrong keystroke could make it shatter. At 4:16 p.m., an alert flashed on my screen: server integrity compromised. Immediate action required. For a company managing defense-grade simulation systems, that wasn't a warning, it was an emergency. I called Liam. Node 3 just failed, check the backup cluster. He didn't hesitate. On it. The hum of the office faded under the weight of adrenaline. Avery's chair was empty. Her jacket still draped across it, but her laptop was gone. I tried her line. No answer. At 4:23 p.m., internal channels exploded. Latency spikes in Seattle. File corruption in San Francisco. By 4:30, the East Coast servers were down. Langford's architecture, 6 years of my design, was collapsing in real time. I dove into the system console. The logs told the story immediately: a manual override from an executive account tagged Akol Tempedmin, Avery's temporary clearance, the one Arthur had personally approved. By 5 o'clock, chaos reigned. Thousands of files overwritten or deleted. Prototype data gone. Engineers were shouting. Security teams sprinting across departments. I grabbed my flash drive, notes, and the company encryption key, then ran to the operations floor. Liam, I called. He was stationed in the glass-walled network center, headset on, face pale. 3 monitors streamed collapsing code. She reconfigured the live system, he said, voice tight. Triggered a recursive backup, it's eating itself. Can we stop it? Maybe. If we kill the pipeline right now. I stared at the blinking red cursor. The command meant freezing every active contract worldwide. Arthur would call it insubordination, but doing nothing would destroy everything. Do it, I said. Liam's fingers flew. The hum of servers stuttered, slowed, then fell silent. For a moment, no one breathed. That silence dense. Heavy was the sound of catastrophe barely contained. By 6:40 p.m., the bleeding stopped, but we'd lost 40 terabytes of live simulation data, millions gone. Liam rubbed his eyes. Drained. They'll blame you, he said quietly. I know. I replied. That's why I'm documenting it. I connected my portable drive and copied every log commands, timestamps, user IDs, all pointing to Avery's credentials. If they were going to make me the scapegoat, they'd have to erase digital truth itself. By 8:15 p.m., 6 members of my team gathered in the conference room. They looked exhausted, sleeves rolled, coffee cups everywhere. We stopped the meltdown, Priya said, voice trembling. But if we don't rebuild overnight, Europe loses access. I nodded. Then we rebuild. No one argued. That's how loyalty looked in crisis: quiet, shared, unspoken. Hours blurred. Pizza boxes replaced project binders. The fluorescent lights buzzed like static. By 1:37 a.m., we had reconstructed the corrupted modules by hand. Liam approached, holding a report. It's all here, he said. Her login, the commands, everything. Send it to my private inbox. I told him. He hesitated. Skylar. If Arthur finds out, they're firing me anyway, I said flatly. I'm just making sure the truth doesn't disappear with me. When dawn began bleeding through the blinds at 7:30 a.m., exhaustion blurred everything into gray. The floor was littered with cables, empty cans, and crumpled printouts. My team looked like survivors of a siege, but the system was stable again. Arthur arrived just after 8 o'clock, immaculate as ever, his polished shoes slicing the silence. He didn't look concerned. He looked inconvenienced. What happened here, he asked, scanning the room. We stopped a total collapse. I said, your temporary admin, Avery, executed a live override that almost destroyed the infrastructure. He raised a brow. Are you implying this was her fault? I'm not implying, I said, turning my monitor toward him. I'm proving it. The logs glowed on screen: Avery's credentials, Arthur's authorization timestamp, the full digital trail. He studied it for a moment, then smiled the way men smile when they already know the outcome. "I'll handle it," he said smoothly, heading for the door. "Take the weekend off." "Skylar, you look tired." That was when I understood. This hadn't been an accident or incompetence. It was orchestration. Arthur hadn't been caught off guard. He'd been measuring my reaction, watching how much I'd risk to save what he planned to destroy. As his reflection disappeared down the hall, everything aligned with brutal clarity. The breach wasn't about data. It was a test, an engineered collapse to gauge the limits of my control. What would you do if your own family tried to erase your career and you had proof they planned it? Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't believe how far this war between power and justice goes. By Monday morning, the storm had quieted, but only on the surface. The offices of Langford Dynamics glowed with their usual precision white lights, silent elevators, and the constant murmur of controlled urgency. Yet beneath that rhythm, everyone could feel it, the tension of a company that had come dangerously close to collapse and didn't know whom to blame. I arrived at 7:50 a.m., coffee in one hand, a stack of system recovery reports in the other. I'd slept 5 hours in total since the incident, and every part of me was running on determination rather than rest. Liam had sent me a final confirmation email at dawn, all breach evidence preserved. Timestamp verified. I archived it immediately. The truth was a dangerous possession here. Evidence could vanish faster than loyalty. Arthur hadn't spoken to me all weekend. Neither had Ethan. When I'd called, his responses were clipped, cautious, like someone rehearsing the lines his father had written for him. I told myself it didn't matter. I had survived the crisis. I had proof, and proof was power. The office was strangely quiet when I stepped inside my department. Avery's desk was immaculate, laptop closed, chair perfectly centered. I took that as a warning sign, not a courtesy. People who clean their desks at the start of a Monday aren't preparing to work, they're preparing to move. At 8:10, I opened my inbox to send a report to Arthur. That's when it appeared a new message. Subject line RE Performance Review Leadership Transition. It came from Avery's email address. Time stamped 7:58 a.m. The first line was what stopped my breath. Arthur, as discussed, I've handled the server recovery narrative. The board believes my quick response prevented further losses. Skylar seemed emotionally unstable during the incident, exhausted, reactive. Perhaps this confirms your view that she's no longer fit for the CTO track. The email continued for several paragraphs, each sentence more deliberate than the last. Avery claimed credit for the containment strategy my team executed and portrayed me as an overworked liability. She even attached part of my internal report cut and edited to frame her decisive actions. At the bottom was the detail that changed everything. Once the transition is finalized, I'll prepare documentation for legal. It's better to act before she suspects anything. For a moment, the world went completely silent. My pulse beat in my ears, steady and distant, like footsteps approaching from the end of a hallway. Then I saw it, the part Avery hadn't noticed. The field still included Arthur's name, but in her rush, she had typed Skylar James into the CC line instead of Sam James. The corporate counsel. One wrong letter. One fatal mistake. I read it 3 times before forwarding it to my personal encrypted address. Then I printed a copy and slid it into a folder marked Contingency. At 8:25, Avery walked in, phone pressed to her ear, pretending not to see me. She was talking to someone, Arthur, probably her voice too casual for the tension in the air. "Yes, she's here," she said softly. "Looks calm. I'll keep you posted." She hung up and smiled. "Rough weekend." "Huh," I returned the smile. "You could say that." It took everything in me to keep my tone level. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. The smarter move was to watch, to let the evidence compound. Throughout the day, I noticed the choreography of betrayal unfolding in small, precise gestures. Executives who usually stopped by my office now walked past without eye contact. HR requested a routine documentation update. My access to a few administrative folders was suddenly revoked. None of it accidental. All of it timed, by 4:30. Liam messaged me privately, "Arthur's holding a closed session with the board tomorrow morning. No agenda listed. Be ready." That night, I scanned and backed up the document to 3 separate encrypted drives. One stored offsite. Then I made tea. I didn't drink and stared at the city lights beyond my window. Betrayal had a rhythm here, soft, polite, and procedural. But now, for the first time, I was ahead of it. At 10:03 p.m., my phone buzzed with a single message from Ethan. "Dad's meeting the board early. Don't make this worse." I set the phone face down on the table. The irony stung. They'd already decided my fate. They just hadn't realized I was the one writing the ending. The morning of the board meeting began like any other calm. Calculated. Sterile. The kind of morning designed to make you forget something catastrophic was about to happen. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., early enough to read the silence of the top floor before anyone else filled it with politics. The glass doors of the executive wing reflected the skyline. And for a second, I saw my own face floating against it, composed, deliberate, unreadable. Arthur Langford was already there. He stood by the window, phone to his ear, one hand tucked in his pocket like a man negotiating peace while orchestrating war. When he noticed me, he ended the call mid-sentence and smiled the way he did when a decision had already been made. "Skylar," he said lightly, "appreciate your punctuality. The board's assembling in 10. You'll join us for the first part." "The first part?" The phrase lingered, vague and sharp. I nodded. Following him down the hallway toward the main conference room, a glass enclosure overlooking the bay. Inside, 12 executives were already seated, folders aligned, expressions carefully neutral. Avery sat 2 seats down from Arthur, wearing confidence like perfume. Her hair was tied back, her suit crisp. A tablet open before her displaying slides. I recognized instantly the quarterly systems performance deck I had created. My stomach tightened, but my expression didn't change. At 7:45, Arthur began. "Before we move to our main agenda, I want to address the recent infrastructure incident. First, I want to thank everyone who contributed to the recovery process." His eyes landed on Avery, particularly Ms. Cole, whose initiative and composure prevented a total loss. There it was, public credit, formalized, immortalized in meeting minutes, a theft in plain sight. I didn't flinch. I just folded my hands on the table and listened. He continued, his tone shifting. "However, this incident also exposed weaknesses in leadership alignment. We can't afford emotional volatility or fatigue at the top. That's why I've made the difficult decision to initiate a transition in systems architecture." Every word landed like a preloaded bullet. The room stayed silent. The HR director adjusted her glasses, waiting for the cue to proceed. Arthur turned to me, voice soft but surgical. "Skylar, effective immediately. We'll be reallocating your role while we review the next phase of operations. It will assist with the handover. You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings." It was all choreographed the same precision he applied to every corporate execution. Even the phrasing was identical to the stories I'd heard whispered in corridors about others who'd challenged him. I looked at him steadily. 5 minutes, I repeated, as if confirming an appointment. He nodded once. "Security will escort you, behind the glass wall." The city glittered in the distance. Unaware that empires could crumble faster than traffic lights changed, the room waited for my reaction rage, pleading, collapse. Instead, I stood. The scrape of my chair echoed like a gunshot. "Understood," I said quietly. I gathered my laptop, notebook, and the single silver pen I'd always used to sign project contracts. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. I could feel every pair of eyes following me, some with pity, some with fear, and one with satisfaction. Avery didn't hide her smile this time. She leaned back slightly, tapping her screen, pretending to check figures she hadn't earned. Arthur glanced at his watch. 4 minutes, he said, almost absent-mindedly. I closed the lid of my laptop and met his gaze. Then I'd better not waste them, walking out. I caught the reflection of my team through the glass walls. They were standing at their desks, watching, one by one. I saw Movement Logan, Priya, Liam, and then others closing their laptops, unhooking their badges. 23 in total. The moment my hand touched the elevator button, I heard chairs scraping behind me. The sound spread like a wave through the open floor. Arthur turned sharply, his calm beginning to fracture. "What's going on?" he demanded. Logan's voice carried from the corridor. "If she's out, we're out!" Arthur's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this!" Liam stepped forward, handing in his ID card. "We already did." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I turned back just long enough to meet Arthur's eyes. No anger, no fear, just the kind of calm that unnerves men who think they've won. 3 minutes left, I said evenly. And then the doors closed. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. But inside Langford Dynamics, 23 resignations had just rewritten the company's balance sheet. The empire Arthur built on control was beginning to crack. And he didn't even know the first tremor had already started with an email he hadn't meant for me to read. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual, though the distance hadn't changed. The rain came down in fine, cold sheets across the windshield, blurring the Seattle skyline into streaks of gray and gold. My phone buzzed twice in the passenger seat, Ethan calling, but I didn't answer. I needed silence. For 6 years, I'd given this family my skill, my time, my loyalty. And now, all I could hear replaying in my head was Arthur's voice, "You have 5 minutes." When I finally pulled into the driveway of the Langford estate, the lights were already on. Through the glass entryway, I could see Ethan standing near the fireplace, one hand on his hip, the other gripping a tumbler of scotch. His tie was loosened, his expression unreadable. "You didn't pick up," he said when I entered. His tone wasn't worried, it was rehearsed, like a line from a script he didn't believe in. "I was driving," I said simply, setting my keys down on the marble table. "And thinking." He turned to face me fully. "Dad called. He said the board voted to restructure your division. He also said you made quite a scene." I laughed once, low and sharp. "A scene walking out quietly, after being ambushed in front of 12 executives. That's your father's version of a scene." Ethan exhaled, the kind of sigh that ends conversations before they start. "Skylar, you know how he is? He doesn't make decisions without reason. Maybe you've been under too much pressure lately." I stared at him. "You think I imagined this?" "I'm saying maybe you're too close to it to see the bigger picture." That was when I knew he had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. Arthur didn't just fire me from his company. He was dismantling me piece by piece. Starting with my marriage, I walked to the window overlooking the wet garden, watching the rain hit the glass in rhythmic streaks. "Do you even know what happened in that boardroom?" Ethan didn't answer. He took a sip of scotch instead. The silence said everything. "I have proof," I said finally. "Avery fabricated the report. She caused the breach. Not me. I have the logs, the timestamps, even the email she sent to your father. That got his attention." He frowned, skeptical but uneasy. "You're serious, deadly serious." He set down his glass slowly. "Then, why haven't you gone to legal? I will," I said. "But first, I need to know whether you'll stand beside me or pretend you didn't know me when this goes public." Ethan hesitated. "You're talking about destroying my father's reputation." "I'm talking about defending my own." He rubbed his temples, as if the conversation itself were exhausting. "Skylar, please, don't do anything impulsive. Let me talk to him." "You mean warn him," I corrected. That was the moment something inside me shifted, not with anger, but with clarity. The man I married wasn't my ally anymore. He was an extension of the system that had just tried to erase me. I walked past him toward the staircase, my heels clicking softly against the floor. "I'll be in my office, upstairs." The air was cooler, My home office looked out over the mist-covered Sound. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and inserted the encrypted drive Liam had given me. The files blinked onto the screen: command logs, access keys, audit reports, all signed under Avery's temporary credentials. It was enough to end her career, and maybe Arthur's too. Still, I didn't move. I just stared at the folder titled Evidence Internal Fraud. Part of me wanted to send it all to the press immediately. The other part, the rationale, calculating part, knew this needed to be precise, legal, controlled. Revenge was useless without proof that could stand in court. My phone buzzed again, this time, a text from an unknown number. Ms. James. This is Margaret Turner, Langford's former general counsel. I heard what happened. If you want to discuss legal protections, I'm free tomorrow at 10. I read the message twice, then closed my laptop. The rain outside had softened to a quiet drizzle. Like the city itself was holding its breath. Arthur thought the story was over. He'd fired me, humiliated me, stripped away my title. But he'd forgotten one detail: he'd built his empire on my systems, my architecture, and my clauses. And tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m., I'd remind him exactly who wrote the fine print. By the next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and silver under a washed-out Seattle sky. I arrived at Margaret Turner's downtown office at 9:50 a.m., 10 minutes early, clutching the folder that could burn an empire. Her firm occupied the 22nd floor of a granite building that overlooked the courthouse, an intentional choice. I imagined Margaret had once been Langford Dynamics' general counsel, before resigning quietly 5 years ago. Back then, Arthur called it a retirement. Now, I knew better. The receptionist led me through glass corridors lined with framed legal commendations until I reached Margaret's office. She stood as I entered, gray hair neatly pinned, eyes sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses. Ms. James, she said warmly, shaking my hand. You look like someone who's just been underestimated. I've had practice, I said, taking a seat across from her. She smiled slightly. Good. That'll serve you well in this conversation. I opened my folder and slid the first page toward her Avery's email. Her eyes scanned it, her expression tightening. Then came the system logs, access records, and security reports. For 20 minutes, she read in silence, flipping each page like she was assembling a puzzle she already knew the shape of. Finally, she looked up. You understand what this means, don't you? I understand it's proof of internal misconduct and illegal termination. It's more than that, Margaret said. This email alone confirms a coordinated effort to defame you and conceal a breach under fraudulent reporting. That's corporate liability. But the bigger issue, she tapped one of the pages, is this access chain. Arthur authorized administrative clearance without proper audit. That's a violation of federal data compliance. I exhaled slowly. So, he's legally exposed. Deeply, she said. If you play this right. I leaned forward. Define right. She folded her hands. Not anger, not revenge. Documentation, precision, and patience. File a pre-litigation notice. Demand internal arbitration. It'll force them to disclose everything they've hidden. Once the evidence is on record, the board will turn on him before the lawsuit even reaches discovery. I considered her words carefully. For months, I'd been reacting, defending, surviving, enduring. Now, for the first time, I had a strategy. Margaret leaned back. I'll represent you, if you want. Full confidentiality. But I need digital verification of those files, chain of custody intact. No tampering. I already secured them, I said. 3 encrypted copies, each time-stamped and notarized by blockchain registry. Her brows rose. Impressed. You really did build the system he's standing on. Every line of it. I replied. She smiled faintly. Then it's poetic that it'll be his undoing. We outlined the plan for the next 72 hours, draft the legal notice, file through her firm, notify the board directly under whistleblower protection, and prepare a press statement only if necessary. She warned me the retaliation would be swift and personal. He'll come after your credibility, your marriage, your finances. Expect that. I nodded. He already has. When the meeting ended, I walked out into the crisp, late morning air with a strange sense of calm. The fight had structure now rules. Timing, leverage. For once, I wasn't reacting to Arthur Langford's decisions. I was writing the next ones. By 1:30 p.m., I was back in my apartment, reviewing the files one last time. The city outside buzzed faintly, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding between skyscrapers. I uploaded the verified documents into Margaret's secure portal and waited for confirmation. It came at 2:04 p.m. Received. Legal notice in drafting. You'll review by 6. At 6:20 p.m., my phone vibrated with another message, this one from Liam. Something strange. Avery just tried to access your old server credentials. She used Arthur's override key. I blocked it. But they're getting desperate. Desperate was good. Desperation made people reckless, and recklessness made them sloppy. I typed back, perfect, let them dig. Then I turned off my phone and poured a glass of water. Watching the fading light hit the sound, the city looked peaceful again, quiet, contained, unaware that a storm had only changed form. Arthur believed firing me ended the story. But Margaret had just opened a new chapter, one where every signature, every timestamp, and every quiet betrayal would finally speak for itself. Tomorrow, his board would receive my legal notice, and the clock on his empire would start ticking. The morning after Margaret filed the pre-litigation notice, Seattle gleamed too bright for winter sunlight, flashing off glass towers like a warning flare. I woke before 6:00 a.m., pulse sharp, mind restless. At the top of my inbox was her message, filed successfully. Delivery confirmed to Langford Dynamics Board at 5:42 a.m. Expect response within 24 hours. There was no turning back now, for the first time in months. The power was shifting. By 8:15 a.m., I sat in a cafe near Pike Place Market, laptop open, legal documents spread across the table like chess pieces. Margaret had taught me one thing: control the narrative before they rewrite it. I built my case: sabotage, concealed data breach, defamation. It didn't sound like revenge. It read like proof. Halfway through my second coffee, my phone buzzed. Liam, they're panicking. Avery's crying in Arthur's office. I'd told to recover everything. No one knows what that means. I watched ferries crossing Elliott Bay, the city glimmering beneath a fragile calm. The empire was trembling, and this time, I wasn't the one breaking. At 10:30 a.m., Margaret called. Arthur's convened an emergency board meeting. She said, "Don't engage until we see their move." Should I prepare a statement? Not yet. Let them show their hand first. By 11:02 a.m., an unknown number appeared on my screen. Ms. James. A smooth voice said, "Nathaniel Brooks, interim chair of the board. We've reviewed your filing. What is it you want?" "Transparency," I said. "And accountability." He hesitated. "Arthur claims you fabricated everything. Then he should welcome an independent audit." I replied, "The SEC would love to help." Silence long, cautious before he said, "We'll be in touch," and ended the call. The rest of the day moved like a controlled collapse. Liam's updates came hourly, executives whispering, compliance teams pulling logs, legal scrambling. By 4:20 p.m., a contact in finance confirmed it. Solara Capital froze all future funding until leadership stability was addressed. At 5:00 p.m., Margaret called again, voice steady but edged with victory. "Formal review tomorrow. You're invited. Arthur doesn't know yet." "Good," I said. Let him sleep peacefully one last night. I didn't sleep at all. City lights flickered across my walls as I rehearsed every question they might throw. Each timestamp verified. Every document notarized. Around 2:40 a.m., I opened the first project I ever built for Langford. My initials still hid in the code: SJ, contingency failsafe active. I smiled faintly. Even then, I'd known to build exits into every system. By dawn, I was ready, charcoal suit, hair tied back. The 40th floor of Langford Tower awaited the same place where Arthur had once counted down my 5 minutes of exile. Today, the air itself felt charged. At 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. 11 directors waited, eyes wary. Arthur sat rigid, jaw tight. Avery looked pale and small beside him. Margaret stood at my side, calm as glass. "Ms. James," Brooks began, "you've accused Langford Dynamics of wrongful termination, data fraud, and defamation. Do you stand by those claims?" "I do," I said. "And I can prove them." Margaret tapped her tablet. The wall screen lit up emails, access logs, timestamps. Then came the highlight: Arthur's override key, his authorization code glowing in red. Arthur surged forward. "This is out of context. Context," Margaret interrupted, "is what a jury determines when a case proceeds to trial." Silence swept the room. Outside, employees slowed their steps, sensing something shifting. Brooks turned toward Arthur. "Mr. Langford, I suggest you step out. The board will deliberate privately." Arthur looked at me, then the same man who had dismissed me like a footnote. Only now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something he'd never shown before: recognition. As he walked out, I exhaled for the first time in days. The countdown had started again, but this time, it wasn't mine. By 11:40 a.m., Margaret leaned closer. "Congratulations, Skylar," she whispered. "They're voting." And in that stillness, the hum of the city beyond the glass, I finally heard what justice sounded like: silence holding its breath before it breaks. The board's decision came faster than anyone expected. By 12:30 p.m., Arthur Langford was no longer the CEO of Langford Dynamics. The official phrasing, "effective transition of leadership pending internal review," was corporate language for exile. I watched from the hallway outside the boardroom as the company's attorneys escorted him toward the private elevator, the same one he used to arrive late and leave early, while others stayed behind fixing his mistakes. He didn't look back. Not once. But his reflection in the mirrored doors lingered, distorted, as if the building itself was erasing him. Margaret appeared beside me, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. The motion passed 9-2. "He's finished," she said. "They'll issue a public statement by morning." I nodded, though the moment didn't feel like victory, more like the end of a storm that had lasted too long. "What happens now?" she said. "We make sure the collapse doesn't bury the innocent along with the guilty." The next 48 hours were a blur of crisis management. Legal teams combed through contracts. Compliance officers restored server logs that Arthur had tried to delete. Avery resigned quietly before she could be terminated. Liam called from his apartment at 7:04 p.m. Voice low but electric. "It's all over the news. Skylar, Financial Tribune just published an article. Langford Dynasty falls amid internal scandal. They're quoting anonymous sources about the walkout and the audit." I leaned back in my chair, the city skyline glowing through my window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. Anonymous sources. I repeated softly. "That's you, isn't it?" He laughed. No comment. By morning, the story had spread across every business outlet. Reporters camped outside the Langford Tower lobby. Investors demanded emergency meetings. The company's stock, once untouchable, dropped 20% before noon. The same analysts who'd once praised Arthur's leadership now dissected his arrogance with surgical precision. At 1:15 p.m., I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Ms. James." The voice was deep, deliberate. "This is Marcus Hale from Hale Stratagem Capital. We'd like to meet. We believe your leadership could stabilize what remains of Langford Dynamics, or, if you're inclined, build something entirely new." It took a moment for the words to register. "You're offering me a position, not a position," he said. "A partnership." After the call ended, I sat in silence, letting the weight of it settle. Partnership, ownership, the very thing I'd been denied under Arthur's shadow. That evening, I met Margaret and Liam at a quiet bar on Fifth Avenue. The TV behind the counter replayed the day's headline, Langford Dynasty Implodes After Data Fraud Allegations. Former CTO cleared of wrongdoing. The photo on screen showed me walking out of the boardroom, chin high, eyes steady. Margaret raised her glass. To accountability. Liam clinked his against mine. To survival. I smiled faintly. To beginnings. But later, as I walked home through the soft drizzle, I couldn't shake the memory of that first meeting, the one where Arthur gave me 5 minutes to clear my desk. How deliberate it had all been. How certain he'd been that I'd crumble quietly. He never understood that quiet doesn't mean powerless. When I reached my apartment, a package was waiting by the door. No return label. Inside was a silver pen, the same brand Arthur had used to sign my termination notice. Except this one came with a note, use this to sign something that matters. Eleanor Langford. Arthur's wife had finally spoken. The following morning, Margaret met me in her office. The board is offering you interim leadership, she said, sliding the documents across the desk. But I think you should consider Hale's offer instead. Langford Dynamics will survive, but it'll never be clean again. Sometimes, to build something honest, you start from ashes. I stared at the papers for a long moment. The decision wasn't difficult, it was just symbolic. Then let's start, I said. Margaret smiled. Almost proud. I'll prepare the filings. By 3:40 p.m., we stood outside a vacant glass building overlooking the bay. The sign still bore the name of a defunct startup. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in marker, "Everything begins somewhere." As the wind picked up, I looked out at the water and whispered, "Everything ends somewhere, too." That night, as news anchors dissected the fall of the Langford Empire, I wrote the opening charter for my new company. Its name came easily, Nova Systems, Latin for new star. It felt right, because sometimes, to light the sky, something first has to burn. 2 weeks after the board forced Arthur Langford to resign, I found myself sitting across from 3 men in tailored suits inside the marble lobby of Stratagem Capital. They represented Hale's investment division, the same firm that had once backed Langford Dynamics before Arthur's arrogance pushed them away. Now they wanted me. The symmetry was poetic. Marcus Hale, the managing partner, leaned forward, his cufflinks catching the winter light. "Skylar, your case was handled flawlessly. The market sees you as the architect who survived a collapse you didn't cause. That makes you rare. We want to help you build something cleaner." I folded my hands, keeping my tone measured. "You're talking about Nova Systems." "Exactly. We've reviewed your proposal, sustainable architecture, transparency first policy, employee equity model. It's bold, unusual for post-corporate founders, but it's honest." Behind him, a panoramic window overlooked Elliott Bay. Cargo ships moved slowly through fog, like the world itself was pausing to listen. I took a breath before answering. "If we do this, it won't be just another startup. It'll be a blueprint for how companies should treat people. No boardroom humiliation, no false loyalty." Marcus smiled slightly. "Then let's make sure it has the resources to prove that model works." By 3:15 p.m., the term sheet was on my desk. $4.2 million in seed funding, 18-month runway, full autonomy, for the first time in years. I was signing a contract that didn't feel like surrender. Margaret reviewed every clause, line by line, her lawyer's precision cutting through the fine print like a scalpel. "No tricks," she confirmed finally. "They're serious about backing you." The next morning, I gathered the core team: Liam, Avery's former assistant who'd chosen integrity over security, Priya, a systems engineer I'd once mentored, and Margaret, now officially Chief Legal Officer. We met in an empty office on 4th Avenue, the walls still echoing with the ghosts of whatever startup had died there before us. "This is it," I said. "Nova Systems begins today, And our first project, Project Eon, will finish what Langford Dynamics started. Only ethically. Liam grinned. With fewer lawsuits. I hope. Margaret smirked. That depends on who crosses us. The laughter was brief but genuine. For months we'd lived on adrenaline and anger. Now there was something else, purpose. The kind that grows quietly, without needing to prove itself. By 6 p.m., I was back at my apartment, signing the final incorporation papers under soft lamplight. The pen Eleanor had sent glided across the page, steady and deliberate. Use this to sign something that matters. For the first time, it truly did. My phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. Arthur Langford requests a meeting. 1 hour. Marriott downtown. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or delete it, but something inside me whispered to go not for him, but for closure. When I arrived, he was already seated in the corner, thinner, older, his confidence stripped bare. He didn't stand, just looked up. Weary. You won, he said. No, I replied quietly. I built something after you lost everything. He nodded, eyes hollow. Maybe that's the difference between us. I left him there, surrounded by the ghosts of his own empire, and stepped into the night air that tasted of rain and redemption. Sometimes, victory isn't loud. It's the silence after you walk away and know you'll never have to look back again. 6 months after Nova Systems officially launched, the warehouse-turned-headquarters buzzed with the kind of energy that couldn't be manufactured, earned, not bought. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the metallic letters of our new sign, Nova Systems, built on integrity. The air smelled of coffee, optimism, and fresh paint. Every wall bore evidence of growth, new departments, framed client testimonials, and a mural Liam's sister had painted a phoenix rising from data streams. Beneath it, a quote I'd written in small black script, "We rise by rebuilding, not by retaliating." That morning, Margaret walked into my office carrying a stack of folders and her usual iced coffee. Final settlement cleared, she said, tapping one folder. Arthur signed the non-disparagement clause. The funds transferred last night. I exhaled slowly, closing the loop that had once defined my life. How much did he end up keeping? Margaret gave a dry smile. Half a house and a lifetime of regret. We both laughed softly. The sound felt lighter than any victory could. By 10:15 a.m., our weekly meeting began. 40 employees sat in the open workspace, engineers, designers, legal analysts, all bound by the same story. They had walked away from fear and built something better. Priya presented new numbers: 43% revenue increase, 3 new international clients, and an acquisition offer we'd politely declined. Let them come to us, I said. We're not chasing validation. Applause rippled through the room. It wasn't the loud kind that celebrated profit. It was the quiet kind that recognized purpose. Around 3 p.m., I took a rare walk outside the building. Rain had just stopped, leaving the streets glistening like a reflection of everything we'd survived. The skyline of Seattle stretched ahead. Familiar, yet changed. The same city where I'd been humiliated in a glass conference room now held the company I'd built from nothing but conviction. A message pinged on my phone, an article link from Margaret. Langford Dynamics files for bankruptcy protection amid leadership exodus. The headline didn't sting, it just felt inevitable. Empires built on ego always fall the same way, quietly. Completely. And always too late. That evening, as the team prepared to celebrate another milestone, I slipped into my office for a moment of stillness. My desk faced the water, where the sun dipped low and painted the surface in gold. I thought of Eleanor's note, of the pen she'd sent me, and of Arthur's final words at that hotel bar. Maybe that's the difference between us. He was right. The difference was never intelligence or power. It was restraint, knowing when to fight and when to rebuild. When the laughter outside grew louder, I joined them. Margaret raised a glass of champagne, to beginnings that were born from endings. She said, To the 5 minutes that started it all, I added, and the room erupted in cheers. As the celebration swelled around me, I glanced at the team, the family I'd chosen. They weren't survivors anymore. They were builders, the quiet kind who make revolutions look effortless. Because sometimes justice isn't loud, it's steady, precise, and unstoppable. And maybe that's why I tell these stories, because someone out there needs to hear that the end of one job, one betrayal, one injustice, might just be the beginning of everything that matters. If this story moved you, take a moment, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs courage today.